Hello, this is Raymond. I'm here with Lewis Edwards. He's a Systems and Operations Lead at Linear Clinical Research in Perth, Australia. Linear is one of our CRIO clients, and that's going to be an important fact as context for the presentation he's going to provide on coronavirus and the impact it's having on his site. But first off, Lewis, thank you so much for making yourself available on such short notice. I know there's a lot of fast-moving developments on the ground, so definitely appreciate your taking some time out of your busy day to share some of the practices that you have developed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Terrific, great, yeah. So Lewis has actually has developed a presentation that he's going to be sharing for us. But take us away and just start off by telling us a little bit about your site, and then perhaps give a little background on how personal this is, because I think it hit pretty close to home, the first COVID case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Linear Clinical Research is one of the largest clinical trial sites in Australia. We're located in Perth, Western Australia specifically. I operate mainly within the cancer trials unit, which focuses on phase 1 trials for late-stage cancer patients across both oncology and hematology. But Linear as a institute also focuses on a wide range of other things. We do anything from renal studies to medical device studies, late phase, early phase, healthy volunteers. So we've probably got about 250 odd staff members, so we're a pretty large site. And as you can imagine, something like COVID-19 and being so close to the first registered death, tragically, in WA has been quite an experience. I think, everyone's perception of COVID-19 3 weeks ago, it was completely different to what it is now. I think every single day we're getting updates from our COVID-19 task force, which is being led by our CEO and a couple of the key medical staff members. But I think, as we see the developments across, particularly in the US as well, it's become very concerning. When we did have the first patient who was a tourist on the Diamond Princess cruise, I believe, that came through, an elderly gentleman. It wasn't really noticeable being on site, and I think it was definitely business as usual, even after he passed away. But I think it really really came to a turn when the COVID-19 fever clinic opened up right next to us. We're all in the medical field and everything like that, but I think seeing the direct result of hundreds of people lining up every single day outside to get into a clinic with masks on starts to make it a true reality. And the response that we've been having to this has been quite good and measured. We've been following the Australian health guidelines essentially and everything like that. But I can just give you a little bit of context here at where we're at today. So far, as of yesterday, we've got 18 confirmed cases and 1 death, as I previously mentioned. We have a very, very, very high negative test rate and thankfully no locally transmitted cases yet. And I think that really comes down to a few things. One being the fact that we are one of the most isolated cities in the world. Majority of the international travel comes through Melbourne and Sydney, but we do have quite a lot of international travel that comes through Dubai, Doha, Singapore, Hong Kong. But also we just have a very, very, very low population density. I mean, it's very, very easy to stay away from other people. Obviously, working in a hospital site and on a clinical trial site is a different story, and I'm sure everyone across the world is kind of feeling that if you're linked onto a hospital. And I guess it's an interesting time around the world in clinical trials with regards to travel restrictions, and essentially, as of today, the Prime Minister announced that all people who travel to Australia actually have to self-isolate for 14 days minimum upon arrival, regardless of where you traveled from. Every day, we probably already had 4 or 5 staff travel restrictions. Originally, we cancelled all business, national and international. We've implemented the following processes of basically having, any contact or confirmed contact with people who have traveled or confirmed case of COVID-19 that you should be working from home. Quite a simple restriction that I think most companies around the world are starting to implement now. And then, yeah, obviously now the issue's been raised where all visitors must now self-isolate. So it brings up a lot of interesting questions with regards to day-to-day operations of a clinical trial site. So the impact it has on us, and this is just a map here that shows, you can see we're located at B block and the clinic is quite close, but it's good that it's quite close because we've actually developed a rigorous screening process where for our healthy volunteers, people that we're actually screening to be on upcoming cohorts of the studies are being sent questionnaires prior to, and they're being screened again by medical staff. They're also being screened at the time of arriving to our reception. The questionnaire it's probably doubled or tripled in fold since it first started as new questions start coming in, becoming more generic. We've had to consistently update these, but essentially the process right now is that if someone does answer yes to any of these questions, they're immediately given a mask. They're sent over to the COVID-19 fever clinic.
And so the COVID clinic that's next door to you is literally a clinic to diagnose and treat COVID cases?
It is a clinic to arrive and be tested. So essentially what it looks like is out the front is there's multiple seats. They're all spaced out apart. People are sitting there waiting hours and hours to get tested. It's actually a geriatric ward, essentially, but they've kind of gutted the front of it to have staff do testing. Now, we've had quite a lot of tests coming through, like that snapshot said, and majority of them are negative. I know people who have gone to this clinic as well, and essentially it's just a nasal swab.
It's to segregate the patients from other staff and patients. Okay, and then there's no shortage of. So Australia is not experiencing a shortage of test kits.
We don't have a shortage of that. I'm not sure if it's a thing of being well prepared, but right now in WA, you don't get tested if you don't have a confirmed travel history or contact with someone who has been traveling. So even though there has been locally transmitted cases of COVID-19 over East and New South Wales and Queensland, they're still trying to keep it down. And obviously, if you're fit and young, they are not going to test you. They'll send you home and tell you to isolate regardless. And it's just a measure, I think, to try not to overload the emergency department, obviously. A few of these have opened, but this one is we're kind of the home base, if you will, of the COVID-19 response.
Okay, so you can send prospective patients you can refer them into the COVID clinic just to make sure that they don't have it.
Yes, and healthcare workers as well have preferential access to tests on local labs. And at the same time, we can also send the local lab teams out to patients' homes to have them tested as well, and especially staff members as well. So if you're self-isolated and you need to figure out if you've had if in the case you've had contact with other staff members, that we need to know if it's been confirmed.
So you're so if you're treating oncology and you're treating so in your late phase oncology, you're treating some pretty sick patients, right? I mean, they're high risk, very high risk of COVID, but on the other hand, they need this treatment, right? So they're dropping out is not an option for a lot of patients, right?
Exactly. I think that there is no real better option, and the risks involved with traveling to a site like ours and receiving receiving treatment is definitely outweighs the risk. I think some of the studies coming out of Wuhan over the past weeks, and just looking at the retrospective data, having cancer essentially, you're immunocompromised, you're 3.5 times more likely to pass away, especially if you're gets worse if you're in the correct age demographic, which, as we know, most of them would be. So a lot of them are late stage patients who are on our phase 1 trials. So it is a very big concern. And from our standpoint, our priorities are to protect our staff, which then inherently protects our patients. Now, the patients do go through the same screening criteria, but it is a bit more complicated when it comes to having coughs, fevers. A lot of these can manifest as B symptoms or progression symptoms, or even response, or even things like cytokine release syndrome, which can come as a result of some of the immunotherapies we're giving. So right now the issue is that if a patient goes to ED and presents with coughing, fever, shortness of breath, which can all be symptoms of a response to an infusion that we've given, and then they're just sidelined and put into a COVID-19 waiting line, and obviously that could be a bit of an issue because the patient can fall apart pretty quickly. So we're trying to figure out what our kind of workflow is going to be for patients who do have issues, especially if they're coughing. How we deal with them. I think we're isolating them to consult rooms for all of our visits, and then they're being seen directly by an investigator or a sub-investigator to determine whether or not they can go into the clinic, whether then be dosed. So it's mainly focused though on the travel history right now. But yeah, obviously there's as a phase 1 cancer trial unit, we really don't have the option of shutting down. Which is the whole reason for kind of using CRIO and this eSource initiative that we have going on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you implemented CRIO about 6 months ago before anyone had a clue something like this would happen. So it was fortuitous timing. We'll talk about it a little bit. But doing visits at home doesn't really sound like an option either. I know people are talking about patients staying at home, but for phase 1 trials, they do have to be in the clinic. They do have to be proximate to the doctors, right? Pretty much at all times. For safety reasons, right?
Exactly. I mean, it cannot be understated how important that is, especially when starting treatments. The whole point of these phase 1 trials is to assess the safety data and to collect fecal samples so that we can have these treatments come out and move on to further phases. So, it's so important that they are here. We don't really have an option in terms of trying to do treatments from home. Whilst they do exist, they're not too feasible in a phase 1 setting, considering the amount of assessments that are required and the risk to the patient.
Right.
In saying that, I think the clinic right now is shared between healthy volunteer cohorts and some other disease-specific late-phase studies, which may see a drop in recruitment. So we might be able to actually start spreading people out and really ensure that we're keeping infection control up to a high standard. But in reality, it's just something that needs to happen for these patients and for us as well.
Right. Yeah. So you have to keep doing this. I mean, that's consistent with the mission and in the better interest of the public. So I get it. It's a challenging situation.
Yes. And I guess our response is how are we going to tackle this? How are we going to continue to operate? And that's a really difficult one, but not so difficult for a site that's in our position right now. Now, some context here. Obviously, as you mentioned, we've been working on implementing CRIO. It's been working for us since December 2019. We did a full complete shift onto CRIO and on one day and ran 51 trials from there onwards on CRIO from a single day forward. But Linear Clinical Research actually does have a history with eSource. So we have used eSource previously. We started 2.5-3 years ago. We're the first site in Asia Pacific to actually use it. So we do have the background knowledge and kind of the infrastructure there to kind of jump on this. So all of this is rather suspicious timing almost, where we're kind of building up to something like this naturally, which is put us in a strong place.
Yeah. So, and just to clarify for people that are not familiar with CRIO or eSource in general, how do you use CRIO in your operations?
So I guess the best way to answer that question is to say, how did we use eSource in the first place? Yeah. Now, eSource was developed with a healthy volunteer mindset, and a particular eSource that we used prior to is still being used at our facility, and it works really well for those teams. But what didn't work for us essentially, and what a business need was it didn't take into account the fact that the eSource can't just be data focused. It needs to have some kind of clinician interaction. It needs to have the ability for doctors to see information in an easy to find place and show the things that need to happen. So previously, the type of data we would record would be, administration, dosing details, vital sign measurements, ECG recordings, AEs, conmeds, medical history, systemic treatment therapies, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the source and what we consider to be source is the true or original place of where you found that information and then transcribed it into an eSource, into an eCRF database, was still paper, which meant that we actually had our investigators doing physical exams by paper so that they could continue to write notes, because I guess it was when you couldn't use a system holistically, there was almost no point in doing it. So we actually were split in between all the clinician side of things happening on paper. We'd still have all of our medical history on paper, all of our lab reports on paper. So we looked for another option, and what CRIO gave us was the ability to upload documents. It also had a really easy to understand user interface, and also more importantly, when you run 51 to 60 odd clinical trials, it needs to be able to be maintained by your project teams. So the simple modular aspects of configuring a study were invaluable, and secondly, the fact that you didn't need to know coding like naming conventions or variable naming conventions, and that when you did change forms, that there wasn't a risk to losing data because of the way that the system worked. So we're able to actually now upload all of our documents and have everything we need alongside the data that's captured in the visit.
So you're creating visit templates using the CRIO system, and then you're capturing original source data directly onto the templates instead of using paper charts, then complementing with uploading of other documents that contain other source information that don't go into the system. For instance, a hard copy consent form or EKG tracing or something that by definition can't go in there. And you're using this at the exclusion and not using an EMR for your source data capture, because this is optimized for research.
Exactly, and that's one of the most important things is, you can talk about using EMRs and you can talk about using eSource, but eSource is actually its own original source, and you can actually define what you're actually collecting is original source, and most of the stuff you're going to be collecting in your eSource is going to be the first time that data has been originated as part of something that's happened. So the EMR section is, we're a private company attached to a hospital, so we don't actually really have EMR access. So what you would have filed alongside of that needs to come alongside of it and be that original source. So I guess in the CRO mind, this is an EMR because it's a holistic.
It's like an EMR,
it's like an EMR. But if you used it just as an eSource without the documents, it wouldn't really be an EMR because you wouldn't have the medical history there to back everything up. So it's a bit of it's a new territory for CROs in general.
Yeah, and I think a lot of scientists and CROs may not be fully aware of this, but a lot of sites are actually legally separate entities from the physician practice, that they may go to market with them and it may look like they're part of the physician practice, but a lot of times it's a partnership between a physician practice and an operator who is skilled at clinical research, because it's a very different animal. So that operator does not have access to the EMR and doesn't want the EMR to be the source data, because you can't really run your operations if it's behind some firewall, some institution. So I think that fact is underappreciated. So EMR penetration just has not really taken off in most indications. A little bit more in oncology, but just as it's not optimized for clinical research. So a lot of sponsors keep thinking it's the EMR, it's not. It's still largely paper chart driven, except for the sites like yourself that are on the cutting edge and switching to eSource.
Yeah, and the other big question is, when you're using an EMR system, is that generally you're not the one who's controlling it, so you can't validate it, and you can't actually say that it can't be used as source if it can't be validated, which means you'd be printing and certifying the copies yourself of anything that's collected in there and putting it in filing it. So
and you can't give the CRA access to it because you've got a huge HIPAA issue, right? You're opening up the entire patient database.
Exactly, yeah. So and kind of just with all that, and this is something we've been struggling with to kind of figure out how we can holistically do it. And obviously the other components that come alongside CRIO with eReg and potentially even using delegation logs is being able to offer an investigator or a medical staff member a single login for all their training, where they can find everything, all the protocols, consents that they need to give to patients is invaluable, essentially. So once we got them on board, the whole thing kind of really fell into place.
Good.
So yeah, going on to kind of the cancer trials unit specific response to this is kind of essentially to work off skeleton staff. Starting next week, we'll be and I guess a little bit of context might be needed here, but instead of having single coordinators that run 8 trials, we have teams of coordinators, normally about 3, that run up to 20, and they rotate through job-specific things like data entry, performing visits and troubleshooting, doing query management, monitoring visits and emailing, essentially filing. Is that now that we actually have this system where, previously if a single coordinator needed to go on leave, someone would need to take on all those studies and know nothing about them. You can imagine just how terrible a situation that would be if that person got isolated for 2 weeks, and then also didn't have an electronic capability to be able to do anything from home.
Right.
So for us, we're able to have 2 of these 3 people actually stay at home because 2 of those job roles can really be done from home electronically, especially when you have eSource. So we'll be having a 2 on, 2 off, 1 on, essentially. And that's also to make sure that we don't have overlapping of staff in the case that someone actually does, get COVID-19, and we can actually address that by having them be isolated for 2 weeks straight, per normal rostering.
So you make sure that the entire staff doesn't go down if one person gets it. And what you're really saying is that you need one person to do the visits, but there's so much administrative work that has nothing to do with actual clinical.
Yeah, it's definitely something like that. So.
Okay, I think I cut out there, had some internet problems since we're doing this live here. But I think your point was, Lewis, that you want to make sure that if one person gets COVID-19, the whole staff doesn't have to be quarantined. So you always make sure that you have a couple of folks. For every one person in the office, you have 2 people who are not in the office, essentially. So 2/3 of your staff can continue.
Yeah, exactly. And you said, as you mentioned, there's a lot of administrative work that if you're a coordinator out there, you can definitely attest to. And, a lot of that has to do with the interaction with your monitor, answering queries, answering emails, filling out trackers, doing all that kind of stuff. So that is definitely something you can do from home, and it's definitely you can use when you have an eSource capability and 100% document upload. The other thing is, as well as we're looking at combining, we have multiple clinic teams that focus on different departments, but combining them to create essentially A and B team that never ever overlap as well. And the same thing, because
that's smart. Yeah.
Whilst the project teams can essentially cease to operate, the one thing that cannot cease to operate would be our nursing staff.
Sure.
Without nursing staff, then we obviously can't treat the patients. So
yeah. And like you said, if you had eSource, when the visit's done in the clinic, someone else from home could do the EDC entry and be answering all the monitor queries, and almost simultaneously.
Yeah, and I mean the processes we have in place actually allow for that. We do data entry within 24 hours of a visit completion, and most of the time it's just a matter of the document upload is actually handled such by the clinic. So we have actual clinical trial assistants that team up with nurses to actually dose and perform ECGs and vitals and do everything and take blood as you normally do. But at the same time, these CTAs are actually going through and uploading all the documentation live. And that's one of the most important things as well, because audit trails are really important. So, showing that we've uploaded things prior to dosing to be signed, doing the right workflows. This was all implemented prior to, obviously, with no sense of COVID-19. So we're actually able to have that documentation come through without it. Not working from home is not going to change how we operate. Essentially, it's just changing the location and maybe some of the focus of some of the people who stay in the clinic or at the site. And then on top of that as well, speaking to other colleagues in other industries that are kind of demobilizing their sites is having the leadership team essentially fill in and provide support there is going to be really important as you do that. And I guess ultimately you have to ask yourself what you're willing to risk in terms of the risk to your patients, the risk to your business, and risk to your staff, really. So I think, we're taking absolutely no risk. And whilst we're probably in the best position geographically to deal with this, we're not in any position to be able to afford to not treat our patients. So it's definitely the mission critical kind of goal for us there.
Mm-hmm.
On top of this, I guess obviously now all monitoring visits have been cancelled. Site selection visits, site initiation visits, anything to come and observe dosing and study procedures is definitely not happening. A lot of these can be replaced remotely through Skype, actual video calls and things like that. Monitoring specifically going to be off-site. Now, pharmacy visits is a different story. Our pharmacy for us is actually located off-site. We have two that we use. One that's actually part of the hospital, and one that's off-site. Now, we're actually, one of them has been integrated with CRIO already. The other we're still working on, but I think the pharmacy visits can still happen because it's a pharmacy. If it's off-site, there's no risk to our staff, which is kind of, the pharmacy will have their own visiting regulations essentially. So now we also sent out a letter to all of our CROs last week, basically just saying, that we're restricting all future monitoring visits for any study that has 100% SDV capabilities, which all of our studies do. But I guess the important thing was that we were already in discussion with the CROs on this, and originally they pushed back. Offsite monitoring, complete offsite monitoring is almost, it's a risk to the glamorous CRA life of flying to and from sites always. And it is the future, and it might be the case that traveling only happens for certain types of visits. And if you're doing like eSource is something that's easy to implement. Actually, it's the ISF that most sites probably would be. It depends really, but I mean, in terms of us, the ISF was a bigger, like this time around, was a bigger hurdle to get over than the eSource component because we already had the infrastructure for it. So depending on what percentage of your operations are actually electronic, it can determine how the CROs kind of react to that. And we've had some fairly interesting reactions so far. I think looking at this from a CRO perspective, it's a very scary thing because it's new, it's novel. Being actually able to do that and control it is something that is probably the biggest pushback we've got, where it's basically they're saying slow down. Like we agree, we like this, but we need to slow down here. We need to have a look at our processes. We need to figure out how we're going to do billing, like how the CRAs will work. Do they work from their own office? How do they access the system? Do they need to do it on a secured network, or do they need to do it on an approved laptop? Obviously, with CRIO being web-based and cloud-based, there's certain things in there that make it so you can access it from anywhere, secure servers and things like that. And that's all been kind of confirmed through our validation. So those are easy ones to answer. But the hard thing is to deal with 15 different CROs at the same time. How can you try and push an agenda for this kind of stuff onto them and have them all respond differently? And I guess that's where COVID-19 has come into effect now, where this is actually making all of them respond quite quickly.
Should be a very easy conversation at this point in time, right?
Exactly. So it's very easy, and it's basically we're getting calls back going, yep, okay, actually don't worry about any of that stuff. Let's do this. Essentially.
I would think they'd be relieved, right, if the CRA doesn't have to travel.
It's a financial burden for sure, but some interesting things were some of the CROs were actually thinking about having, for example, a Perth-based monitor, which is actually a very niche thing here because the isolation is so massive that some people there aren't offices here for CROs, so we would just have Perth-based monitors where they might actually only do pharmacy visits, whilst a team of CROs monitor in-house at their office over in Sydney or something like that. So they're actually beginning to start thinking about how they can implement site-specific, just for linear changes to how they operate that will obviously be more efficient. And they look at the system, they look at what we're trying to do, and they really like it. They can see it's the right way to do it, and they're happy to do so.
And you must
fighting their own internal SOP.
Well, they have to, at this point, confront it. But you're probably not the only site that's prohibited on-site monitoring, right? They're encountering that elsewhere.
Yes.
And if it's paper-based, they really have to figure that out, right? And probably a lot of scanning and faxing.
Yeah, and just a lot of work. And I mean, you could imagine that you couldn't do that if you had any kind of risk to your staff resourcing or anything like. I think it's just a matter of they've been slow to respond to it, but I think now that they're all starting to turn the corner, and they're realizing just how important this, because sites are closing, sites are going to begin to
Absolutely. And do the CRAs even want to travel? Imagine a good number of them don't, right?
I think some of them do. I don't know. It's the perks of the job. I think so. Yeah. But I think it's when you tell sponsors that you have a system that doesn't need monitors to come to your site, their eyes do tend to light up because they see savings. Obviously, it makes it easier as well. But I think
it de-risks it too, because if their CRA picks up COVID-19 at one site, guess what that CRA is going to do, right? Travel from site to site to site for that same sponsor. Exactly. So it just the risk magnification is huge.
And I think there's a lot of interesting things that you'll see when you begin to do remote monitoring completely. That doesn't require scanning and sending through, where you'll be seeing different frequencies of queries coming through. Whether the days of 100 queries from a monitoring visit and then working the next 2 weeks to resolve them might be over when you have a steady flow of things coming through.
Yeah.
But also it does mean that when the monitor does come to site, they're focusing on everything that isn't SDV. The classic stuff of having to make sure you file all your GCPs, CVs, ISF management, all that kind of stuff. It's always kind of left behind at every single monitoring visit, and it often gets left as action items for coordinators as well, which is one of the big frustrations, I guess, when you have action items that are due to the fact that the monitor didn't have time. So I guess when they do come to site, the issues that can be resolved are going to be more focused, and it will be more efficient, and everyone will have a better time, I think, for sure. But in order to do all this, you need to have 100% document upload. It's just the way that it needs to be. And I was speaking to you previously that it's interesting to hear that quite a lot of sites might not actually do this because it is a lot of extra work.
It is.
It is definitely. I'll tell you, it is a lot of extra work. But anything can be solved with the right process or system in place. So I think.
Would you ask for extra compensation because it is extra work? Have you considered that? Or
no, I don't think so. I think it's really a matter of kind of when you have to actually tag documents in the system or upload things. It's really thinking about adding on an extra 1 minute. Take that extra 1 minute to do something.
Yeah.
And I guess for us, a lot of system and process changes just come down to how you think about it. It's a change in conception and how you actually think about doing something. Where if you need to think about the fact that the patient doesn't have an actual file anymore. We don't have patient files. You need to think if this is something important, where does it needs to go?
Yeah.
Online, it needs to go into the system. And I guess the process we have in place of putting things like scanners and printers directly into the clinic for staff to immediately upload ECGs. We have things where people upload all the blood reports. People are responsible for certain things, and we're able to build those into our workflows. And we're also able to build the cost of operating CRIO into our visit structure through just slight changes in budgets and stuff as well.
Great. So that's good.
That's another thing as well. That's make it work.
Yeah, and I think that the case for a site basically passing through the cost of eSource eRegulatory technology and adding a surcharge for each visit for the document upload is more than offset by the savings in travel.
Exactly.
Not just the hard cost of travel, but also CRAs do bill for sitting on an airplane. There's travel time. It's sort of a no-brainer if you actually sit down and pencil out the math. So I would think sponsors it's in their interest to work with sites to restructure the budgets. Right? To enable remote monitoring, particularly in this day and age.
It's even coming down to the fact of archiving. Now that archiving, if you actually do maintain everything 100%, you don't actually need to spend any time archiving anything.
True. Yeah.
There is an archiving cost built in, and then obviously you have to transport all your files to a secure location. And then if you do need to see it, you need to see that data. It's requested for whatever reason. You need to pay fees and have that come back, and it's man-hours. It's time. So with this, I'm able to actually just, if I inactivate a study, just pop in, have a look, see what it was.
Yeah,
It's available at any time, which is another thing. There's plenty of things here and there that you can work into kind of the changes for it, and it all kind of does make sense in the end. And the issue is, I guess, is for us implementing all this, it's been difficult, but it's just been continually training and communication, I think. And if you really have some strong processes behind that, and you've got a good team, I think this is absolutely achievable. We're kind of running pretty smoothly now, where we probably here and there 95% of our documents are actually there, and sometimes they do get missed. It's just the way it is, and you'll be able to see that, and monitors can obviously request it to be uploaded within the system. So yeah, and I guess doing that again, if you're working from home, that's data entry from home, which is, again, I mean, you can even outsource your data entry now. It's something you want to do, you can outsource it because you've got your source. So you can do your data management from home. So you can you can respond to queries, clean everything up, QC stuff, and then you can also respond to all the monitor queries and remove their sticky notes, that they classically have, and sort all that out. And then they can basically essentially offsite SCV to near 100%.
Yes.
Monitors, which is just really crucial, because it's really the data that we're trying to get here. The crucial endpoint data is what the study's about, and if we're able to kind of do that, then I don't think a lot of CROs will turn around and they're not going to complain about that. So
yeah, and the next iteration of this is at some point, I mean, we technically can solve this. We actually did it in a validation environment. We can send data into an EDC system. We did it with one of the top EDC vendors, and it's doable. It's doable today. It just requires sponsored CRO approval, because it's like we can just do it. They have to agree to it. But yeah, as more and more sites adopt this platform, it's going to be a very compelling case to work on the integration next. So that day is coming. It's coming soon.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, you can only just imagine how much more efficient that'll actually make it when you're not having to transcribe the data. I mean, other eSource we do a full service study directly to sponsors, due to the fact that obviously it might be a healthy volunteer study that has a single cohort worldwide, and where we've got that cohort, so we're able to do that.
Right.
And they're currently using that system, and it works really well, and it is much more efficient when it can happen. But also, when you're talking oncology and hematology, this is not only just data, but it's patient data, it's medical history. If our patient gets admitted on the weekend for something, I'm able to get a phone call, because some of the leadership members and coordinators are actually on call for SAE reporting, essentially. So we get notified if the patient goes to the hospital. I'm able to actually just route. For example, I had a patient that got a call. They had a raised troponin, so there was some cardiac issues there, and I was able to actually route the two most recent ECGs that we had on CRIO to an investigative review from home, and make a decision on whether or not they decided that this patient needed to come in. And turns out we needed a baseline, and the one that we did on the day, and we did. And he was able to make the decision that this is probably not something we need to send them to ED, but if their baseline ECG was different, then it would have been a very important thing. And then he would have absolutely been able to make the call to send them to the emergency department. So, it has wider implications as well. Telehealth trials, offsite remote trials, so trials out in the country where you can't actually have your investigator on site. Being able to route them documents and have them sign it is absolutely crucial. So you're able to kind of broaden your horizons there with a lot of that kind of stuff. But again, it all comes down to the processes and systems that you use. And going into this next section, I guess it really comes down to the documents itself. So we've done a lot of training on document certification, and obviously with the backing of the FDA guidelines and stuff like that for eSource and e-signatures and stuff like that, and how you actually certify a document. This is the one thing that all CROs want to see. They want to see your quality control process. They want to see how do you upload the data, how do you upload that lab report, or that the medical notes, or whatever, the ECG? Who's responsible for it? What steps are they taking? We're able to integrate this with CRIO and the e-signature capabilities for that to actually turn the e-signature into a final control check for our documentation certification. And obviously by doing that, we can then destroy the original copies or replace the original copies, allowing us to be completely electronic. So this process as well, obviously, it's your source, it's your data. I think it's pretty easy to see when you don't have the source, you don't that you need to actually do data entry. You know, you can't enter labs if you don't have a lab report in front of you. So you're gonna go, well, where's my source, and you're gonna make sure it's there. But this process is actually comes down to meeting criteria for like what's the resolution of the image like. Is color meaningful on this image? Should it be in color? Is the image rotated upright? If multiple copies are there all in the same orientation, you know, is it true and accurate to the original? Is it cutting things off? It's a whole big checklist that by actually electronically signing the document, that person is stating they've confirmed that those are, you know, correct, and that's the quality control process. So, and again, it seems simple, but it's something that we found that we need to train over and over again on. We've done lots of this, and it's an ongoing process. As we kind of work with the system as well to try and figure out the best way to do this and what's needed. And again, having the CROs already doing this and using this, we get a lot of feedback from them and the monitors coming back with things and catching out all the little mistakes we make. So it's as they always do. But so it's definitely an ongoing, like, dynamic process, and you need to consistently reevaluate the processes and if they're working for you. So
great, yeah. And the FDA has made it abundantly clear you can delete or shred the original as long as you have a certified copy.
Exactly.
And a process to confirm that. So we actually went and got a regulatory consulting opinion on that to provide our clients, just to make absolutely double, triple sure. But there's no ambiguity about that. That's 100%.
That's the beauty of it. I mean, the regulations behind all this are so clear that there's basically you can't really argue with it. And you know, myself, I validated the system independently on my own. It took me probably 6 months odd, very, very in-depth validation.
Sure.
And the beauty of it is that I know essentially that that the system is kind of it's there, and there's not a single part of it that isn't considered or that hasn't been built without considerations for FDA regulations and compliance. And it's a really solid system, and the amount of flexibility that is within that system is something that's the impressive thing, that you can make it work for how you want it to work for you. So I think it's important that sites, you know, really do focus on validating the system well, so you can understand how to use it.
Yeah, and you did a super thorough job. Well, most of our sites are not doing that. But we have been audited. Our sites have been audited. 3 of our sites have been audited by the FDA using the CRIO eSource system, and absolutely no findings with respect to the use of the system. And they followed our recommend. Yeah, I think you did your own validation your way.
I followed for the actual testing. I followed your test steps.
Okay.
But then I had to obviously add in a lot of the specific part CFR Part 11, requirements, and just like a few extra things in there. But that was on my end for like quality control. So
yeah, you did. I think you went a little bit more than what we provide as a baseline. But the sites that were audited by the FDA just followed our recommendation, actually. So yeah, it's a no-brainer. This is a non-issue. This compliance
exactly,
question.
Yeah. And I guess when you're dealing with the CROs, it's a really important thing to be confident in it, because it's more of a, you know, if they tell me no, I say, well, ask the question, well, can you tell me why I can't use the system? Because obviously, you know, they obviously don't have answers. But I guess that's not really the line we're taking. It's just that sometimes CROs, different companies have different processes, and they can be slow to react to things. And especially with this whole COVID-19 issue, we definitely haven't seen responses from all the CROs yet. And even talking to them, some are more aware than others. And most of the sponsors, as you can imagine, especially the global ones, they're going to be developing and considering every option. You know, are there going to be protocol amendments? Are they going to make protocol clarification letters? How are they going to address or give guidance on what to do based on, how bad the situation can get? And no one knows. And I guess that's kind of the thing here that everyone's worried about. How can you continue to run the trial? So I think, we're able to confidently say all this because we've been running in this direction with this and implementing these processes, and it's all kind of fallen into place for us. So
yeah, our experience has been that if there's any resistance by the CRO, it's usually an individual CRA. But if it's one of the large global CROs or sponsors, as soon as it goes to one of their compliance departments, it's a very straightforward process. I mean, most of it is just a questionnaire at the most. And once they're comfortable, they're comfortable. But so a lot of times people say, "Oh, some big company doesn't want me to do it." Really, no. not that big company because they have 30 trials in our system, is probably the one CRA who's this is the first time they're encountering this.
Yeah, exactly, and that's always the case. It's just something you got to push past. But it's definitely an ongoing process when you're trying to do it all at once. Trying to manage it all, especially in anything now. But I mean, like obviously, everyone's open to anything essentially now. Really to get to try and continue to operate. So it's been a very interesting experience for sure. And just continuing on, sorry about the processes here. Like we developed PI and sub-I signature workflows. And a lot of this is actually captured in a process handbook that we made, which is just kind of like not an official SOP, but a guideline that I just continually added things to as we developed along, which will then be a basis for actually creating official SOPs based on the system. And a lot of this has to do with instead of having an investigator sign off on a set of vitals, is that you can actually have them enter their yes or no, this is clinically significant live into source, and audit trail obviously is there for their name, and then you can see that that's the investigator responding it rather than having them to come back and sign things like that. So a lot of it's focused on capturing it live and as true source rather than having to go back and change things. So we've got workflows for essentially vital signs, and then an ECG one, which involves uploading and tracking and assigning the ECG to the correct doctor, and then the doctor making the decision on it. And obviously, you receive notifications like through the system. So we have workflows for that, and then we have a general workflow for just how we actually operate when it comes from all the way from scheduling a visit to destroying the documentation for that visit that you actually just completed, and with the different sections, it's kind of like a factory or like an assembly line almost that goes through the project teams, through the investigators, through the clinic, through the lab, and back to ultimately the project team for data entry. So throughout this process of trying to figure out, how we do offsite monitoring, we've been having to implement the pharmacy, the lab, the clinic, and the project team. And getting them all access to the system, training them, figuring out how they're going to upload their things, what the documents are going to be called, keeping it consistent, and what your nomenclature is going to be is also really important. So again, it's all process orientated, and it's not something to jump into. I'd stress that it's something that we were able to jump into it because we had the infrastructure and knowledge of eSource in place. It's not something that I would recommend, but it is something that you should go study by study. We were looking at a time where we needed to switch immediately off the system, and we were only able to do so because we already developed, quite large and comprehensive SOPs on our end for this kind of stuff. So we had the process in place to do it. And this isn't something we just, switched on like a light, essentially, So something you definitely want to consider when you're trying to switch all of your studies to be 100% electronic. But as with anything, it's just an ongoing process. So. An interesting thing we did was a thought experiment, Originally, when we were planning to do offsite monitoring, just because we didn't have space for all of our monitors to come in, was that we thought, okay, well, what do we need to give them to actually do SDV? What's the minimum amount of information we need to give them to try and get most of it done? And it's actually pretty simple, and it's kind of broken down. And this is the format that we use for actually making sure that all these documents are actually assigned to the visit. So when you're QCing it, you can do a quick check and be like, and looking at it and just identify the type of documents that are there and what could potentially be missing. So we looked at it, and obviously you have your eSource template data, which is a lot of the specific data, and that data is almost always the original source, so you don't need a document to back it up. So physical exam, if you've got that in your eSource template, then you don't need anything alongside of that. You have your lab reports, ECGs, and imaging reports that might be available for that visit. We even have our PK/PD lab processing logs, so aliquotic times, centrifuging times, freezing times, shipment logs. We have the dispensing logs from the pharmacy that come through, the actual scripts for the IP, and also other medications as well. We still do nursing and medical notes on paper because in the event of an infusion-related reaction or something happening, or a medical emergency team call, we need to be able to quickly and accurate accurately document things and plans. So we'll just upload those at the end of the visit as part of our process. And then obviously you have your communication surrounding the visit. And then each one of these types of documents is actually linked to a department. So, you have certain things that'll be uploaded by project teams, certain things uploaded by clinic, certain things uploaded by lab and by pharmacy. And if you can define what those documents are and actually break them down into who's responsible for what, you'll find that it quickly comes together in terms of actually having everyone, put their egg in the basket for the visit. I think the most important thing is capturing that data that doesn't have that is really true and original. Like, example is like your nursing and medical notes. They only exist in one place, and that's on that piece of paper. For instance, your communication surrounding that visit, which is most likely an email or a PDF approval form that's been signed, that's always going to be available in your emails. You can always print that off again. The quality control process and trying to get everything you need is really focused on the things that do not actually do not have other copies. I can print off as many imaging reports as I want for the same thing, or as many lab reports. I can always request them. The things that are generated as part of a visit for the first time ever are the source that really needs to be quality controlled and ensured that is the document and it's uploaded at the correct time and assigned to the right visit. So when you look at it like that, and you break it down into its core components, it starts to become a much easier thing to swallow when doing it, especially when it comes to identifying who's responsible for uploading those documents. And then, so obviously we had individual processes for each and do training and figure that all out. And, obviously the future is to have a lot of this information is to just get away from paper logs. It's moving into creating, logs for your processing. And like you said, potentially moving forward into IP dispensing logs and that kind of stuff, which is, you can build any of this stuff into the system right now. So it's just a matter of, we couldn't change everything at once. Sometimes it is easier to write on paper, but the key thing is that source actually just gets uploaded to the visit. Yeah. That's what's important. So, yeah. And then with that, moving into off-site monitoring, I think it really just allows. The biggest fear was that they, for some reason, they thought that they would not be able to monitor at the same rate or frequency that was agreed to in the monitoring plan, because we originally said to them that you could come every 8 weeks to do pharmacy and SEP, and the rest of it had to happen remotely, and they kind of were worried that they weren't going to be able to get the data done, but it still allows for the exact same frequency. It's just offsite, and you have a call afterwards. It's booked in the same way. Previously I had to book in monitors in spaces that were always completely busy, and it was a chore just to have the correspondence of when I can actually get them in. Now they can just kind of say, I'm going to do it on this day, and I can say, great, I've got 30 minutes for you at the end of the day for a phone call. Let's do it, kind of thing. So it makes that a bit easier. And as we mentioned before, with COVID-19, it does protect all the parties involved. With how important we know social distancing is right now, this is just something that's so important, being able to do. And again, it's all in line with what we believe in linear clinical research. We exist to nurture medical breakthroughs, and we're trying to bring treatments to our patients in WA faster. And that's kind of what we're really about. So being able to continue to do this and do it more efficiently is a win for us. We don't have to hold any studies. I mean, worst case scenario kind of things is we do based on staff resources, but that's really our only limiting factor here. And that, we can still collect our crucial data. And more importantly, the patient safety is maintained. It's actually, patient safety is improved because at any time, any doctor can have a look at all their information. They can see their AEs, they can see their medical history. People can give more accurate responses when we get phone calls, even staff that don't know the patients, because they can just go online and look. So that's a really crucial thing as well. And obviously the CRAs have access to it 24/7, and AE data, after a cycle 1 day 1 is really important to sponsors. But again, the response has been generally very positive, and a lot of them are really working with us. It's been a very open discussion, and we're having lots of meetings with them to figure out how we can actually do offsite monitoring, how we can help them to tailor their processes to the system that we're using. And any of that is just better than the classic remote monitoring, which a lot of sites might actually start facing, which is to upload documents and de-identify them for every single visit that you've done. So it really is lowering the burden on study staff when you might not actually have that resource to do it. So that's it's really unique. And it's something that we've realized is kind of a turning point, I think, when people actually start thinking about this kind of stuff, and it's opened up a lot of lateral thinking in terms of thinking about the industry. And the clinical trial industry in itself it's been a very, very slow to adjust industry. I mean, sites still being on paper in 2020, and wet ink signatures is something that it's incredibly archaic. So it's been slow to move, and people, just because of all the regulations, despite actually the fact that the FDA is completely on board with almost everything electronic. It's just people don't like change. So I guess this should hopefully spark some innovation, and it certainly has for us in terms of what we can actually do with this now, and hopefully the new normal will become offsite monitoring, and we'll be able to continue that process.
Yeah, interesting.
I guess thinking more again, COVID-19, this is my last slide here, but it's actually just thinking about some of the worst case scenario things we've been thinking about is, it is changing every single day, and your ability to operate, whilst it is resource limited, depending on how you operate and depending what you are going to actually be doing, you need to consider quite a few things. And I would like to say that this is definitely the responsibility of the sponsor and the CRO to come through. But as we said, it's coming through intermediately, and these are things that we're beginning to kind of identify, eventually come up with solutions on a case-by-case basis. But you need to think about your IP surplus and supply. Do you have enough IP right now, if shipments were to stop, for your patients to continue on trial? Does that come into factor with maybe having a recruitment hold so that you can focus on the patients that you have? But then obviously, again, we are a cancer trials unit, so we don't want to be denying patients treatment that can potentially help them.
Yeah.
So for us, the IP surplus is a big thing. And previously, we've already had issues with sponsors. We're in Asia Pacific, and our time zone is directly linked to China. We have a lot of business through Asian sponsors, and a lot of good relationships with them, and we already had issues already with drugs coming through and from China, and having to be diverted to different depots and all that kind of stuff. So that's already been happening, but I guess it's going to be happening for everyone now, because there isn't going to be a place where you can divert it through to be quarantined, essentially. So how can you ensure that your supply chain is still going to be there? And that comes down all the way down to even your kits, ordering kits. Obviously, if you don't have the correct tubes and stuff like that, you're not going to be able to collect the samples and special things that might be happening. And then you need to ask yourself, okay, well, based on what's happening and as the situation unfolds, how are we going to respond to this? What are we going to focus on? And I think mission critical assessments, focusing on the patient. Some sponsors and CROs are already offering just the medication to come through, and they're not expecting assessments or anything like that. So they're on board with kind of the patient comes first here. And this is really about becoming to a situation where how can we put the patient's best interest first, which is really, really good to hear, because this data is so important to them, the PK data. So it is a difficult thing to do, but I think that they're all on the same page.
And I think the regulatory authorities made it very clear that they can be very forgiving of protocol deviations at this point.
Yes. Yeah, and I think we've just decided, that after a certain date, we're just going to be recording our protocol deviations as resource specific. Protocol violations, obviously, to key data points will also be there. But again, you do need to record all of it, and you do need to still make ethics submissions so that when this is all over, essentially, you can look back on it and say that, yes, well, these were actually due to this, and the data is all there, and you're still keeping up with, GCP and how you actually, good documentation, essentially, and just continuing within all processes. But I think the levels of response is something that's just kind of, it's good to put it out there to see how the CROs react to basically what your worst case scenario is. But the thing is obviously it's difficult to tell where we're going to be in a few months' time, what will happen, especially with Australia and Perth. We're lagging 2 months behind a lot of the world, essentially, on, I think, transmission and kind of our preparation. Obviously, what's happening in the US is a good sign of what's to come as well, and obviously Italy and everything like that. So taking the best precautions is obviously the best route, but we really don't know, what the peak will look like. We can't say if it's going to affect our staff or not. So this is really just about thinking of everything and trying to at least have thought of it before and kind of think, trying to just figure it all out. And I get this is I can't stress enough that we're doing this every day. We have meetings every day on this. We're just kind of constantly readdressing what's happening, how we're going to manage the staff. A lot of us do work from home already, a day or two, and might do data entry and stuff. But how can you actually manage your entire team from home? That's a whole different story, So it's new territory for anyone. I don't think anyone's ever run a clinical trial from home, to be honest. So
no question. Yeah, no question. This is the industry's never seen anything like this before. I mean, it's just every day is fast changing things. I'm curious. Have you done any? I mean, you've talked extensively about obviously the technology and this concept of having certain members of the team at home at all times, so that you always have, I guess, redundancy with staff. Have you done any other changes? For instance, car rides for your patients instead of having them take public transport?
Yeah, already, especially some of our hematology patients that, there might be neutropenic or something and they're already avoiding it. I think unfortunately, we've been restricting visitors to come with them as well. So we don't allow family members to come in unless it's a very special circumstance. The suggestion has always been to make use of our Cancer Council and Leukemia Foundation services that we have. We haven't implemented a direct transport service, but in times like these, I think things where it comes down to patient transport and obviously, paying patients, we pay for transport fees most of the time, is probably looking towards implementing Uber and things like that, which we already do for some studies, and it would be a sponsor cost essentially.
Absolutely,
maintain it and all that kind of stuff. So we do have the foundation there, but I think it's going to be interesting to see. The patients are still coming in, and we have had some cases of people coming with coughs and cold and flu-like symptoms. So again, it's a case-by-case basis for us.
Yeah. And what about cleaning techniques or hygiene? Any simple common sense kind of things that you've done?
Yeah, previously, I think the only time we've ever had an infection control issue, I think, at Linear was a few years ago. We had a case of like a stomach bug that went around the clinic and 2 people got affected by it, and we implemented some strict regimes for hand washing. But we have staff stinks every quarter, and we've been doing a lot on hand hygiene. So we've been installing hand sanitizers everywhere. We've been putting up the recommended government signs for knowing the symptoms and all that kind of stuff, and also putting that up everywhere. Staff are all pretty on board because we've kept the conversation pretty open, putting out all the information for everyone, so everyone's aware of just how serious it is. We've also trying to make it so that sometimes we actually have people who are trying to go to the clinic actually coming into our block, thinking that they can get through to the COVID-19 clinic. So putting up signs there. And really, I think education is everyone's best weapon against this, because at some stage or another, travel bans aren't really going to work when it's already spreading locally. So the education is key. So we have signs for hand washing and above every sink and everything like that. So
yeah. Are you finding that some patients are paradoxically holding on to their clinical trial because it almost guarantees them direct access to a physician and somebody monitoring your safety at all times, right? I could see people being concerned that hospitals are going to get so crowded. I better hold on to my trial PI.
Yeah, I think we're a private institution, so I think what we do offer is we do offer that connection with the patient. And being on a clinical trial is amazing for someone who has cancer, because they're consistently and reviewed all the time. They have access to the coordinators at any time, who also have access to the doctors at every time. So I guess for anyone out there, this is a great time to be on a clinical trial.
Right.
It's, because even the measures in place for dealing with COVID-19, you would probably have, improved access to testing. You'd have direct results. You'd have the doctors there. In saying that, when it comes to the oncology-specific trials, if it's not working for the patient, it's not working for the patient, and we won't continue to keep them on trial, because we're not going to continue to give them potentially, experimental IP, basically, in case that it leads to something else. So I think being on a clinical trial is great because it really does bring everything out into the open for you, and you do have access. And a lot of our patients, when they go back to the public system, they hate it because they don't have access to us. They can't just call the doctor. They don't have people helping. No one knows their names. That kind of stuff.
Sure.
So we do get a personal touch, and it helps. And I think our patients, educating them is really important as well, because they're the most at risk here. So I think starting with them is probably the best thing to do, and educating them as well is probably the best thing to do, which is what we did.
Terrific. Okay. Well, Louis, thank you so much. Really appreciate it again. You're taking quite a bit of time to share your best practices with us on such short notice, and congratulations on all the terrific things that you've done. I mean, no question your organization has really thought through this, and really done a great job, balancing all these different challenges on your plate. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's all about sharing knowledge on this stuff and our experience, and I guess it's one of the benefits of being one of the first sites, and the first site in Australia to use eSource, is that we do have a lot of experience, and we're more than happy to share it, especially with something with a system like this as well. So I mean, we're looking to try and expand this into other departments and stuff. So it's all kind of that conversation of how can I think there isn't enough site-to-site communication, regardless of how things are done. In the clinical trial world, people kind of stick to themselves. I do think sharing the knowledge definitely a benefit. So happy to do it anytime.
That's a great note to end this webinar. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.